let up with more rain to come today, and it looks like for the rest of the week.
What would make water flow up and not down?
And the northeast coast is getting hammered by this unprecedented storm.
The storm's getting worse and the surge is going to hit London dangerously close to high tide.
London is quite safe.
And what if this is the 1 in 1,000 year storm?
Floods are the ultimate weapon of mass destruction.
This is unbelievable. The water is pouring in. The water is coming like a huge wave, moving right down the Thames.
Perhaps you should press for an evacuation.
With a population of 7 million, London is one of the world's largest low-lying cities. Significant portions of the city are located very close to sea level. Through its heart snakes the Thames River. The Thames connects London to the cold waters of the North Sea. It's a tidal river that brings the sea uncomfortably close to the city every single day. London has always feared the power of its destructive neighbor. So much so that it has built an elaborate system of walls, gates, and levees as protection. But none of these would be enough if nature conspires to create a mega flood. It would take a unique combination of events, the first of which would be rain. Weeks and weeks of rain.
On. It's Kirsty. Doug's let me down again, so I'm going to have to take Jem to school. Will you tell Mike I might be late?
London is used to rain. Normally the river carries it away, up to 20 billion gallons of it every day. But a prolonged period of exceptional rainfall would take the city into uncharted territory.
1 inch of rainfall over 1 square mile creates 14.5 million gallons of water. And that water is all trying to move downhill to the lowest point.
What would make water flow up and not down?
Something very weird. Gravity makes water flow downhill, down through the pipes out into the river. You do science.
But this morning, water was flowing up and out of the sink.
Really? So your dad's going to pick you up, okay?
What if he forgets?
He won't forget. He wouldn't dare after this morning. If he's not here, you go home with Tim and Mrs. Hughes, okay? Love you!
The city's main protection against flooding is the Thames Barrier. It's a system of steel gates at the bottom of the river ready to be raised if an incoming tide threatens London.
The Thames Barrier offers a very good standard of protection, but the consequences, should the barrier be overtopped, which could happen, would be devastating and enormous.
But relentless rainfall is not enough to flood the Thames. Another ingredient is needed, and that will come a little later in the day.
Morning, Kevin.
Never known the river like this. High readings everywhere except the wharf.
Why? What's you getting at the wharf?
The gauge is bust. I'm not getting anything.
The people who work at the Thames Barrier help maintain the city's flood defenses, or levees, and provide a high water warning system.
Kirsty Gibson.
Kirsty?
Mike, look, I know I'm late again.
I want you to go and have a look at the gauge at the wharf on your way in. We're getting no reading from it, okay?
Sure, I'll go and check on it now.
And there's no let up in sight, with more rain to come today, and it looks like for the rest of the week. Now,
the city, has a capacity. It can only take so much rain in an hour. And after you go over that limit, then what you have is lots of water spilling over out of the drainage system, flooding the streets and flooding all the lower lying areas.
Under the streets of London lies an extensive network of drains, which normally carry away excess water. Should they fill up, there is nowhere for the water to go but onto the streets, where it will send manhole covers flying and render the network of drains useless. The main ingredient needed to create the mega flood takes shape now, 1,000 miles away, above a small stretch of the North Atlantic Ocean. A storm is forming. As the pressure drops, the ocean begins to stir. Nothing to worry about in London, at least not yet. But if the storm moves into the North Sea and combines with the unusually swollen Thames River, then this city will be one step closer to disaster.
To this weather, and look at it, fuller than I've ever seen it.
Not now, Frank, I'm not in the mood.
You know it's spring tide in a couple of days. Nowhere for flood water to go as it is. Any more of this?
Frank, if I had £1 every time you told me London was going to flood, I'd be a bloody millionaire. And if I was a millionaire, I sure as hell wouldn't be wading through this muck.
Well, you should have been here at 6 o'clock this morning. The tide was so high you'd be swimming through it.
Rain, heavy at times, is expected to continue, and forecasters warned of more stormy weather on the way.
Here's the latest weather reports.
Thanks, Kev.
Winds in the upper atmosphere are pulling air up from the surface of the North Atlantic Ocean, lowering the pressure. It's this pressure drop that triggers the formation of the storm. The lower the pressure gets, the more deadly the sea will become. Air rushes in from surrounding areas toward the vacuum at the heart of the low. The rotation of the Earth spins this mass of rushing air into a full-blown storm. The wind this creates begins to whip up the sea below.
Now, where were we?
36,400 new homes in the Thames Gateway.
Sorry. These reports, Mayor wants to know if there's any danger of flooding.
No, don't think so. Just blocked drains, apparently.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Evening, Marshal. 1 minute 30 for the lunchtime, 2 minutes for the 6 o'clock, all right?
A 2-minute report on manhole covers?
No. 2 minutes on London to disappear under biblical flood. You know, we're all gonna die. That sort of thing.
You're the second person to ask me that in 10 minutes. Might get a bit of localised flooding, but London's not going to be inundated
because of rain. The only thing that would do that is a big storm surge, like in 1953, and London's protected from that now by the barrier.
and the other flood defences.
Right. Look, I know this is silly, but do you know anyone who thinks that London could still flood?
Not here, no.
Anywhere?
You could always go and ask for a bargeman called Frank Medlock down in Fisher Creek. He's never short of a word or two about flooding.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.
You're evil.
This storm looks nasty, Kevin. Can you keep me updated on the forecast?
The storm is growing out in the North Atlantic as the air pressure continues to drop. With less air pressing down on the ocean, the surface of the water rises into a giant hump. It's as if a massive vacuum cleaner is sucking up the center of the ocean. For every 1% drop in atmospheric pressure, the sea rises by 4 inches. Already, this intense low-pressure system has boosted the height of the water by an extra 1.5 feet across an expanse of ocean. This is the start of a storm surge, a ruthless body of water that begins to move out across the ocean.
It's not the height, it's the volume of water. You have to imagine that that's 0.5 meter times hundreds of miles in both directions, and that's a vast quantity of water.
In the middle of the ocean, a storm surge, however big, is harmless. But Britain knows full well how dangerous it can be if it strikes land. It has happened before. In 1953, a storm surge caused utter devastation to parts of the British coastline.
The storm surge was the worst on record for the North Sea, and in the UK, 307 people died, but in the Netherlands, something like 1,800 people died as a result of that flooding.
Nowhere in England was hit harder than Canvey Island, where 58 people died. The island is only 38 miles from central London. Canvey Island sits in the estuary where the Thames River meets the North Sea. Fearing future surges, authorities strengthened flood levees and gates from Canvey to London, culminating at the Thames Barrier. Rising nearly 23 feet high, this series of gates has been shielding London from floods for over 20 years. But the threat from storm surges is growing.
The Thames Barrier, when it was first built, in the late 80s was closing once every 2 years. Now, on average, it closes 6 times a year. The reason for this change in frequency of closure is because we're having more storms, more storm surges.
And there's more. Sea levels have risen at an alarming rate, 8 inches in the last century. It's a trend that is expected to continue, so each new storm surge will be higher, increasing the potential for total destruction.
The result is that we are open not just to more surges, but to a very large surge that could be catastrophic and could take out London as we know it.
Mike, can I have a word?
What's up?
This storm's getting worse in the Atlantic.
And?
And I think we should be planning for a closure the day after tomorrow.
Day after tomorrow? That's a way off. Could have blown itself out by then. Okay, we'll keep an eye on it.
This doesn't look like it's going to blow itself out, Mike. Look at the isobars. They're getting tighter all the time.
Isobars are the lines that indicate air pressure, and every meteorologist knows that the closer they are together, the worse the storm is becoming, and the faster the winds.
The winds are still building, and that's what's going to be worrying people.
While the low pressure created the surge, the winds are turning it into a monster. As they blow across the surface of the sea, they push more water into the surge, continually increasing its height. And like the conditions behind London's flood in 1953, the storm is pushing the surge south toward the shallow waters of the North Sea. Its effects are already being felt along the British coastline.
If the Thames had its way, Parliament, the City Hall, and that new gallery, the Tate Modern, would all be filling up with water.
But they never do they?
No, but they could. All it would take is a big storm like the one heading this way. We're long overdue for a big flood. Let me show you something.
Despite recent precautions in and around the Thames River since the last major flood, there are a number of vulnerable spots in London, like poorly maintained levees and gates.
The weakest link might be a gate that won't close. It might be a private landowner who hasn't maintained their flood defences very well for the last 20 or 30 years. And a serious flood affecting London could pinpoint weaknesses in those defences.
We analysed the standard and condition of flood defences in the Thames estuary and found that 1 in 20 of the defences were in poor or very poor condition, which means that they've got a much greater chance of breaking under the force of a storm surge.
Many of these defences have gates in them. They have gates because there are factories, there are yards behind these defences which are working entities. They are part of the economy of Eastern London. These gates are a problem in the sense that the responsibility for closing the gates in a flood surge situation rests with the individual landowner, and you can bet your bottom dollar that one of them won't be closed in a serious flood surge situation.
Right, now, you see this gate here?
Yeah.
It only needs 1 or 2 to be open during a storm surge.
Right, but a little gate like that isn't going to flood London, is it?
Have you any idea what a storm surge can do? You can't afford to have even the slightest chink in your armour. We're talking massive amounts of water here. We've got a big storm coming, and the highest tides we've had for years.
Exceptionally high tides are expected this time of month, the result of the position of the moon. The Earth is about to come in line between the Sun and the Moon. In this position, the Moon has the strongest possible gravitational pull on the Earth's oceans, creating what is known as a spring tide. In this alignment, high tide can almost double in size. It's the final ingredient needed to create the perfect mega flood.
Hello?
Hi. Thought you want me to wake you.
Okay then, it's 3:32 in the morning.
It's a big surge, Kirsty, and it's heading straight down the coast. It did say to call you.
Well, when's it going to hit London?
6 o'clock tonight. High tide.
Okay, I'm coming in. Call Mike.
While London sleeps, conditions at sea continue to deteriorate to the point where Britain now faces its biggest flood threat for over 50 years. The danger is not the storm, but the surge it pushes. Now as it heads south, the unique geography of the North Sea comes into play. What makes this sea so dangerous and London so vulnerable is its shape. The North Sea narrows and gets shallower. Any storm surge that moves south gets squeezed into the enclosed area between the British Isles and continental Europe. It's a deadly combination.
when you squeeze water like that, it has two effects. One, it accelerates, it speeds up, and also it rises up, it humps up.
Now only 5 hours from London, the surge hammers the coast at over 10 feet high.
The prediction we're getting for Canvey is bigger than anything we've seen before.
No. Look, Kirsty, I'm not saying this is a normal storm, but the way things are looking, it's within what Canvey Island's defences can handle.
Just about, if it doesn't get any worse. And if it's bad for Canvey, it could be really bad for us.
Well, we'll just have to monitor the situation, but at the moment, it's forecast to be substantial but manageable. In any case, you need to get on with the barrier closure after low tide.
Barrier experts rely on computer models to predict water levels. But these models don't always get it right, so a big surge could be severely underestimated.
Well, no model is perfect because it relies on information that was gathered in the past and is being used to predict the future. And if the conditions are changing very rapidly and changing in a way that has not been forecast, then there will be trouble.
Barrier closure team, this is Control. Please stand by for closure after midday.
Received.
Kevin, can you inform the port authorities we're closing after low tide?
Mike, London News and reception for you.
This is plainly a serious storm. Now, what does it mean for London?
It is serious, but we are fully prepared for this kind of event. Now, we've decided that a closure is going to be necessary in response to this storm, but people should not be overly concerned. The forecasted water levels are within what the barrier was built to withstand.
And how accurate is your forecast? We all know the weather is notoriously difficult to predict.
Well, over the years, the model has proved itself to be robust. Any other questions?
What about, say, Canvey? Will that be safe from the surge?
Okay, our information to date suggests that there is a possibility of some minor flooding, but nothing major. All right? Thank you.
Sorry, just one more question. London isn't just relying on the barrier. Now, what about the defences, the embankments? Will they be up to it?
London is quite safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Forecasters plot the storm's route down the coast every step of the way.
Look at that. And it's only 6 hours till high tide in London.
The surge is absolutely vast. It's a huge amount of water, hundreds of miles, and when it starts to overtop defences, it just keeps overtopping them.
Okay, Mike. Last gate's raising now.
Okay, thanks, John. Got it. Okay, everybody, thank you. The last gate is now closed.
With the barrier's floodgates up, nothing more can be done to protect London from whatever is coming.
The most alarming situation would be a sudden deterioration in weather conditions, a sudden marked increase in wind speeds. We're talking about the most severe category of storm here. The entire surface of the ocean is covered in thickly driving spray and foam. All the wave tops are literally torn apart by the force of the wind as they form.
Look, total height of the water coming down the east coast is over 4 meters in places.
Barrier, yeah? Got it. Okay, thanks, Jimmy. The storm's getting worse, Mike. And the surge is going to hit London dangerously close to high tide.
The unthinkable is now a reality. At high tide, a storm surge in the North Sea is headed straight for England's south coast. London's 7 million residents are in great danger. The timing couldn't be worse. It's also spring tide, when the combined gravitational pull of the moon and sun on the ocean are at their strongest. If the surge hits now, London will experience a mega flood. The surge is being pushed by a storm, and it's getting bigger by the hour.
London's flood defences are likely to be severely tested by the combination of high tide and this storm. Officials say the Thames barrier will keep the city safe from flooding.
London is quite safe.
But as one survivor of the 1953 flood, Frank Medlock, told me, the barrier itself may not guarantee our safety.
Our flood defences are only as strong as the weakest link.
A recent report stated that almost 10% of the tidal defences are less than satisfactory. So is the official confidence well-founded, or is it complacency? Londoners may just be about to find out.
Bloody great. Made me look an idiot. Well, where is that bloody gate?
Fisher Creek.
Well, get it sorted. What's the latest on the surge?
It's not looking good, Mike. The figures are way higher than the model was predicting. Look at this.
Start working out what this means for the Thames.
Yeah.
It's now that authorities need the most up-to-date information. In addition to weather reports, eyewitness reports are also gathered from the Coast Guard and merchant ships along the battered coastline. It's information that will help keep computer modeling on track.
These estimates are usually very accurate, but like all computer programs, they're capable of underestimates from time to time, and the usual reason for this type of program underestimating is that the winds are underestimated.
The strength of the wind is essential in calculating how big the surge is going to be. But within a severe storm, it's all too easy to get the wind speed wrong, and a small error can make a big difference.
A model depends on the data that's being forced into it, and if some of the data is wrong or out of date because conditions have changed very fast, then reality, if you like, diverges from the model. And it's that divergence that starts to worry forecasters and will particularly worry people at the barrier.
Storm tide. Barrier. One moment. Deputy Mayor on the line.
Hi, Ray. Hello, Mike. Got a bit of a panic on here. What with the news reports, worry about the storm and so on.
Yeah.
The mayor himself asked me to check. You did mean what you said about no danger to London.
The thing is, Ray, we've just had this freak reading from the East Coast.
We're trying to find out what's really going on.
What do you mean? Is London safe? You're not making me feel any better, Mike.
Listen, I need to run some figures to find out what this means for London.
Right, I'm cancelling all calls. Keep me informed.
Okay, I'll take over from here on in. You get down to Fisher Creek and see what needs to be done.
Right. Mike, can I have a quiet word?
Yes?
Perhaps you should have pressed for an evacuation.
Look, Kirsty, it's a tough call. This thing's taken everybody by surprise. And the last thing the mayor's office wants is a panic.
I know. It's a difficult decision. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to check on that gate at Fisher Creek, and then I'm going to go and get my daughter and take her somewhere safe.
The decision to evacuate London is not in the hands of Thames Barrier officials. It can only come from England's Prime Minister.
Fran, what are you doing?
I'm trying to help matters out, that's all.
Sure you're not forcing this gate open to make your predictions come true? Never thought I'd hear myself say this, but you might be right about this flood.
Well, I hate to say I told you so. Are they evacuating the city?
I don't know.
250,000 people in the Netherlands were evacuated and it didn't flood. And of course that's quite difficult for the politicians, for the police involved, because people blame them then for doing something that wasn't necessary.
Then, the storm surge hits the mouth of the Thames River, the gateway to London. There's no longer any doubt about its size. Defences, barriers, gates and levees mean nothing now.
Suddenly, the sea comes ashore, wallop, goes over the defences, and it simply destroys all these small houses that are there. The potential for death and destruction is very high.
This can't be happening.
Okay, I need to speak to the mayor's office.
Oh, we got it! Thank God. I don't know how much good it'll do, though. Hello? Oh, no. Okay, thanks. I've got to get Gemma. Thank you, Frank.
This is unbelievable, an extraordinary sight. Canvey Island is flooding. The water is pouring in over the defences. This island that was so devastated in the 1953 floods with the loss of so many lives is now reliving its tragic history.
Apparently this storm surge might go over the top of the barrier.
When exactly?
About an hour. Yes. Prime Minister's office, please.
The surge rides toward London on the back of high tide. As the river narrows, the floodwaters are forced higher and higher.
Flying above this storm surge, you can see what a staggering amount of water this is. It's challenging all the defences. This is the moment our flood defences were built for. And all Londoners can do now is pray that the Thames barrier itself will hold.
At the barrier, they would be very worried indeed. They fully understand that the barrier has a limit. It can protect up to 6.9 metres. It can't protect any higher. The question is it high enough? If it goes over the top, then we will have a major problem.
The moment Londoners hoped would never come is here. The surge flows over the top of London's state-of-the-art flood defense, the Thames Barrier. Now the city's entire flood protection system is in uncharted territory. The barrier has never been flooded before. London is only 9 miles ahead.
I'm sorry, Jem, darling. I had a meeting.
I was waiting a long time.
It wasn't so long. I was only 20 minutes late?
The barrier is holding, but the water is coming right over the top of it. The surge is like a huge wave moving right down the Thames.
The sheer force of surging water will likely breach many of the surrounding levees, not unlike what happened in New Orleans. Any undetected structural weaknesses in these defenses will give way under the pressure of the surge or from the force of passing debris.
The fundamental problem with a breach is that you wouldn't know where it's going to occur. We don't know where all the weak links in the chain are, so you can't really plan for a breach.
quick.
It's an explosion of water. And we have flood defences to defend us, and we can be living and working on the other side of those, and we don't expect them to breach. And when they do breach, it's catastrophic.
Floodwaters are now inundating the suburbs of London, flowing into areas behind levee walls, destroying homes, businesses, schools. From here, it's a half hour to the city's financial center. Once a levee is breached, the force of the water will rapidly scour out the remaining embankment. A small trickle quickly becomes a torrent. There will be little warning and no time to escape. Police and emergency services clear the streets, urging people to get to safety in preparation for what is just around the corner.
Stormwater continues to tear away at the defence wall. Now, after weeks of the worst rainfall on record, London's sewers and rivers, they're all overflowing. The water has nowhere to go but to push relentlessly across the land.
What is it? What's happening?
It's flooded, Dad!
Flooded, the London Underground subway system would become a death trap. But this would only happen with the most extreme surge, or if the Thames barrier itself had failed. Then the city's transport system would be crippled for months, if not years.
The entire central system of the underground network will fill up with water.
You would have a huge amount of sediment in the tube. It would be if like a sink. It's a drain, if you like.
People underestimate the power of water. Relatively slow-moving water is actually very powerful, and you can look at the water and think there's no problem, I can wade across there, or I can drive through that water, and then halfway across you realise it's far more powerful than you thought, and you're swept away.
You'll get debris in the water, you'll get pallets, you'll get shopping trolleys, you'll get cars, you'll get a whole host of things coming, rushing towards people who are actually in a flood situation.
With London's drainage system already full from weeks of rain, the floodwater has nowhere to go. Streets are turned into rivers.
If you go down through a manhole cover, you're going to drown. It's very unlikely that you'll survive that event. You've gone down into an underground cavern effectively with water moving through it. There's probably no pockets of air. It's contaminated water, it's cold water. You'd be highly lucky to survive.
Stay there! What's there?
A drowning person desperate for air will panic and struggle furiously. This uses up oxygen and speeds the countdown to unconsciousness. When the carbon dioxide level in the blood reaches a critical point, it triggers an overwhelming natural response, the breathing reflex. Victims can't help taking a breath, even though they know they are underwater. With no more air and their lungs full of water, they lose consciousness. The next few seconds are critical.
Come on, Danny, breathe. 1, 2, 3, breathe. Okay.
Floods are the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. Their ability to destroy infrastructure and to destroy people's lives is not met really by any other natural disaster.
A mega flood overrunning the City of London would devastate the infrastructure and the economy. The cost to rebuild could be as much as $100 billion or more.
We would be looking at a total bill of £50 billion just for damage to property and infrastructure. On top of that, there is the business interruption, disruption costs, which we haven't yet quantified properly.
In the 20 years since London built the Thames Barrier to protect the city from floods, sea levels have continued to rise. So the day may come when the barrier won't be enough to stop a mega flood. With 7 million lives at stake, securing the city is a race against Mother Nature.
New infrastructure, new drainage systems, new sewers, new river outlets, new barriers, always takes decades to actually envision and build. So we're always playing catch up, but we're trying hard. It's just whether we can catch up in time to prevent the flooding of London.
Each year, the threat of this perfect disaster comes closer.